This Week in Startups is brought to you by WordPress.com. Right now, WordPress is offering you 15% off any new plan purchase. To create your small business website today, visit WordPress.com/twist. And Capterra. Join the millions of people who use Capterra every month. To start your search today, visit Capterra.com/twist.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of This Week in Startups. This is the program where we talk about technology, startups, investing in them, and all that crazy stuff. We have a massive crisis here in the Bay Area and in a lot of cities across the country and in fact the world. And it's not talent, it's not transportation, it's not taxation, it's housing. Housing has become a hot button issue in many, many cities and regions around the United States, with homes being unaffordable and the ability to produce more housing being throttled by a number of interests. There's a movement of people who are NIMBY, not in my backyard, and then there's a counter movement, the YIMBY movement, yes, in my backyard. And the front line of this war seems to be the Bay Area, where housing has become more expensive than anywhere else in the country. And the ability to rent an apartment has reached a level that has exceeded New York City, my hometown, which was Manhattan and Brooklyn, the most expensive place to rent. Now it's San Francisco. And we literally are having fights at community board meetings, not quite in the streets, but protests and fights over people building more housing. It is the hot button issue of our time, and it turns out that it's really impeding the ability of companies to operate in the cradle of technology, the Bay Area. Just this week, WordPress Automatic decided to shut down their office because nobody was coming to it, and they're hiring people outside of San Francisco, and they realized flying people in for these remote workshops that they would do made no sense because hotels were so expensive. They're better off doing it in other cities. It's a chokehold right now on San Francisco, which is, candidly, the most dysfunctional city I've ever lived in. And housing seems to epitomize the dysfunction more than any other topic in San Francisco. My guest today, Kim-Mai Cutler, is a journalist, writer, works at a venture firm, and I'm not sure exactly how you became the authority on housing, but I think, one, welcome to the program. Two, I love following you on Twitter because you are actually going to these community board meetings in Palo Alto and Mountain View in the city and reporting on them and writing incredibly long pieces in the Wall Street Journal and in TechCrunch and other publications about what's going on here. So welcome to the program. And how did you become the authority on housing in the Bay Area? When did you start covering this? And how did you become such an authority?
I grew up here.
Oh, okay.
So I've lived on every side of the Bay except for Marin.
Okay.
For many, many years. I've lived in, I lived in the East Bay for like 5 years and San Francisco for 8 years. And I grew up in the South Bay. So I've been all over. And I've also, traveled a lot to lots of other cities around the country and world. And I was always so struck growing up here by how just sprawly and, the dysfunctional transit and all this sorts of other stuff in the Bay Area, how we have all of this dysfunction and lack of coordination despite being, the birthplace of so many different revolutionary technologies and cultural movements and social movements. And so I don't intend to leave here. I intend to stay, but I would also like to make sure that this place is left better for following generations.
And so you have a passion for it as a citizen?
As a citizen, as a resident, as someone who, whose family has been here for 3 generations. And then I started looking into it in about 2014, which was around the time when these Google bus protests were happening. And, to the credit of those activists who were part of that, they really elevated the issue and the discourse.
Who were these activists? Because they seem to be particularly aggressive, throwing rocks at the bus, puking on the bus, standing in front of the bus. It seemed very intense. Who were they and what was their position? Because it wasn't exactly clear.
Yeah, I think it's hard to box like a bunch of different activists with different types of interest into
So there
one.
are many.
So there are many different groups that had different strategies and different people running different types of tactics on them. And so like that particular incident was that was in the East Bay, but the group that was here, I mean, it was, it was a lot of folks involved with the housing, or the HRC, which is the Housing Rights Coalition. It was people working on evictions and, making this, a form of visual theater and getting it into the press was their way of pushing it into, the eye of public policymakers. So, there are different activist groups that are around, but, the more time you spend in it, you realize that there's like so many different, there's such a vast patchwork of different little groups.
Some are anarchists. Some just don't want to be evicted.
Some don't want to. Yeah, some are concerned about displacement of tenants in the city, and then some are property owners who just don't like stuff to change. So it really depends which group and who you're looking at.
Bus protests have stopped.
Yeah.
Why have they stopped? Because the situation has gotten worse. It feels more contentious. Why did they stop?
I think that was because
I'm thankful they did.
Well, I think the leadership, like one of the people who was organizing it, moved to LA, moved to Los Angeles. Another person, or they moved on to a different cause or struggle. And then I think another person is in graduate school or finishing graduate school or finishing a PhD. And so I think it's more that they have other obligations. But like it is, what one or two or three or five like very committed people can do to push something into the public eye and then to influence laws and policy around it. I mean, people often underestimate their own power in that sense.
So my hometown of New York is having a construction boom, and it has for many years now. And it seems like a very highly functional city. And also I lived in Los Angeles for a decade, and they also are having a construction boom. Mm-hmm. And it seems to be a very highly functional city. Mm-hmm. San Francisco seems very different to me, having lived in these three cities. Is San Francisco much different than those other two cities? And if so, why?
So I think the main reason actually is how the regions are governed.
Okay.
And you got to go back 100 years in time to understand why the differences are so substantial. Okay. So in the late 19th century, New York annexed the four other boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens. So there's one government for 8 million people in a city that is making a coordinated set of policies and investments around transit and housing. LA, It is also, it's more fragmented there because you have municipalities like Santa Monica that are separate.
Carved out, but the rest of them are kind of together.
But LA, is the largest one. And if, Eric Garcetti wants to make a commitment to public transportation through a major bond and says we need to do, $50+ billion of investment to vastly expand the metro, he's much more clout in doing that.
Right.
If you look at the Bay Area is 101 municipalities for 7 million people. And so you have 101 governments trying to make policy. And there's no strong entity at the core of that kind of coordinating and holding all of these municipalities responsible.
So a Mountain View, a Palo Alto,
they're all doing different things.
San Mateo, San Francisco, they all have a different agenda. They have different rules and regulations, and they seem to be extremely NIMBY.
Some of them are.
Yeah.
Some of them are.
Some of them are.
Yeah.
So why in San Francisco, let's just take the city for a second, why is there massive building going on in Soma, where we have the Transbay train station going in, the Salesforce building, and a bunch of other buildings? Seems like massive construction in Mission Bay.
Yeah.
So Soma and Mission Bay just taking off. And then Pac Heights, Hayes Valley has a little bit, nothing in Pac Heights, Inner Richmond, all these other places, there's nothing being added.
Yeah.
How come inside of the one city, one jurisdiction, we have skyscrapers going up in one location and you can't build in any of these other places?
Yeah, so there was a multi-year process, maybe a decade or so ago, called the Eastern Neighborhoods Plan, where the eastern side of the city was rezoned to add more capacity. And actually, there is also a rezoning process going on right now for Central Soma, which is next to where we are. in Hayes Valley actually did see a lot of construction when the highway was torn down. So you know that middle section of Market Street that is a little bit south of here. I mean, a lot of buildings went up there.
Right.
But the west side is challenging. The west side has been challenging for a long, long time. Right. The west side, the western neighborhoods of Sunset and Richmond were built out, in the mid 20th century when, primarily white families were leaving for suburbs. And, San Francisco probably felt like it had to remain competitive and offer like a comparable experience or product, whatever, to what the suburbs were offering, which is this kind of single family home experience. And for, people who live there are very protective of how that neighborhood looks and feels to them. But there was this program called Home SF that was literally just signed last week. And it was led by a Sunset supervisor named Katie Tang, who grew up there, who's second generation to the Sunset. And what it was taking advantage of the state law called this density bonus law to add more height or more floors of height in exchange for a commitment to a higher amount of affordable housing. And it took 2 years to get that passed, but it was finally signed by the mayor last week. So that as a law, symbolically, it opens up the west side to more housing.
Now, there is a mitigating factor here, which is the west side of San Francisco, and largely all of San Francisco, has a terrible transportation system.
Yes.
It's horrific.
Yeah.
BART is breaking down constantly, and it doesn't really go that far. When we get back from the break, I'd like to understand why there is no mass transit that goes from San Francisco out to the west side and down to the peninsula in any reasonable way, like the New York City subway or the London Metro or the Paris subway system, when we get back on This Week in Startups. All right, thanks so much to my friends at WordPress, a product and service that I use and love at calacanis.com and thisweekinstartups.com. We've been using it forever. We use it every day, and we love it. Whether you're looking to create a personal blog, a business site, maybe even a podcast, or both, you're going to make a huge impact when you build your site on WordPress.com. We love it. It's easy to use. It's got so many features. If you don't have experience building a website, well, WordPress can guide you through it. They have hundreds of themes to get you started. You just pick a template and you make it your own. Built-in search engine optimization and social sharing so that you can get all that traffic coming into your site. Everybody loves to get search traffic. Everybody loves to get that social traffic. And with WordPress, that comes built in. When you build your website on WordPress.com, you are part of a community with 24-hour support, and you can see why. When you sign up for WordPress, that 28% of all websites in the world run on website. Take that in for a minute. 28% of the world's websites run on WordPress. And more websites run on WordPress than any other platform. So here's your call to action. Get started today with 15% off any new plan purchase. Go to WordPress.com/twist. WordPress.com/twist, TWIST, as in This Week in Startups. And you can create your website and find membership plans that work for you. It's super easy. We love it. This Week in Startups and calacanis.com, both running off of WordPress for over a decade. Over a decade for calacanis.com and coming on a decade for This Week in Startups, because the show is only 8 years old. So in 2 more years, we'll have our 10th year anniversary for This Week in Startups on WordPress. And I think I'm 12, 13, 14 years on WordPress for calacanis.com. It's great software. It's easy to use. Go ahead and check it out now. Okay, thanks again, WordPress, and let's get back to this amazing episode. All right, welcome back to This Week in Startups. My guest today is Kim-Mai Cutler. You can follow her on Twitter, and it is really worth following her. I just love your Twitter. Kimmai Cutler, Cutler. You are pretty prolific on the Twitter.
Yes.
A lot of retweeting, and you go to all of these meetings, I see.
I don't go to all of them.
Not all of them.
At this point,
You've gone to them.
I've gone to some.
Yeah.
At this point, there's such a vast network of people doing it that I've just become a clearinghouse of information of people who go to these meetings. And so,
how many followers do you have?
I don't know, like 30,000 or 30,000.
And they're all really passionate about this housing issue.
A lot of people are really passionate about it. It's a generational issue. It's pretty serious.
The young people coming into the city now
Yeah.
are very frustrated.
Yeah.
that there are not a number of housing options, and the people who are being displaced, because so many young people are coming here with high-paying jobs, are feeling that there's a bit of a gentrification going on that never feels good. And I have heard a statement, which I would like you to tell me if you believe or not, which is that all housing helps the situation. In other words, even if you build luxury apartments that are $1 million or $2 million each, which seems downright cheap here in San Francisco, but even if you build luxury apartments, no affordable housing, that will lower the pressure on the more entry-level units, because what we see today are people who work at Google or Facebook finding a very cheap apartment that would normally be for middle-income or even low-income people, and then they just gut it, renovate it, and they're kind of living in, just like in New York, we saw in the 90s, people move to the Lower East Side and live in what were tenement buildings, they called them. I don't know exactly where they got that term from, but these buildings that were considered pretty run down, but they would just renovate them and they would be nice. Is it true that all units help and that really is the goal? We should just do what New York did and greenlight a bunch of units?
So building more, I mean, it's a two-part answer, which is to say, the California Legislative Analyst's Office looked at building in different neighborhoods and how it impacted gentrification and displacement, and found, that building more does ease some of those pressures. But, the ideal situation is really you're building more to match population job growth, and you are securing another funding source for building low income or affordable housing. And now increasingly in San Francisco, that would be middle income housing. So, today, there's an architect named Mark Hogan who is also another authority on this subject in San Francisco, but he, calculated out how much it costs to create a unit today in San Francisco. And, all in land and construction is about $714,000. But the issue is when you look at the job creation of the Bay Area, we actually produce many more, like minimum wage jobs than we do, these stereotypically highly paid jobs. And so if you want to address multiple segments of the job market or the income, income levels of the region, you have to, you do need to find a funding source to, subsidize, a certain segment of more affordable units, and also to, support legal protections for people to keep them from being evicted.
And is that actually the solution? Or getting back to the question I talked about earlier about transportation, I know when I lived in New York, we quickly learned that Manhattan was not going to be a place that we could afford to live. It was for rich people. And if you were not rich, do not expect to live in Manhattan. There were some pockets of affordable housing, rent controlled, et cetera, but just give up on that dream and move to Queens, Brooklyn, New Jersey, Bronx, wherever, Staten Island, take the ferry. And you had this wonderful transportation system where people who were out in Jackson Heights or Forest Green or Bay Ridge could get to the city in under an hour, half an hour for a very affordable price with a token or a Metro card. We don't have that here. Is that the root cause of all this pain? Is that which is the bigger cause? I wonder.
So we're one facet that is unique about the Bay Area market is that no public transit agency has more than, say, 45% market share of, the boardings and trips that happen in the region, whereas MTA, I think has something like 90% market share of all the trips that are made public, transit trips. And this is a result of the problem that I mentioned, in the last session, which is we have a fragmented governance system. And so we have 20 plus different transit agencies in the region.
20 in the region.
Yeah. Now,
let me just see here, because I'm new. I've been living here for 3 years, but I've spent a lot of time here over the years. You have the BART.
Yeah.
Bay Area Rapid Transit. It runs from the East Bay into the city, and then it goes a little bit south. Maybe I think it ends in Millbrae, right above San Mateo and Burlingame. Then you have something called Muni.
Yep.
I don't know what it stands for, but it seems to be buses or these electrical buses that run all over the city. That's different.
Yeah.
Those are run by two different agencies. Why are they two different agencies and two different systems?
So they both have they have distinct histories. So BART was the brainchild of a lot of actually like business leaders of the Bay Area in the 1940s. So like the Bay Area Council, which was founded by Earl Warren, who was a Supreme Court justice, a bunch of business leaders in the 40s realized that we would want to have, kind of a mass transit system. And so for their 30 years, they planned and they helped, finance, lead the region into financing it, which is again why I pressure people who run companies in this region to be vocal about this issue and to put pressure on elected leaders to support shared and mass transit. And then Muni is actually a different system that
it's a rail system,
right? So originally, when the cable car lines and the different streetcar lines were created in the city at the before the turn of the century, they were actually created by entrepreneurs.
Right. They were private little companies.
Lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then by the time that the car became popular, these lines fell into more and more disuse, and they stopped operating profitably, and they were going to run out of business. So the only way to keep them running was to municipalize them, hence the name Muni.
Got it.
So it was municipal rail, and it got taken over by the city. So these are two separate systems with two different histories. Muni is totally within San Francisco, the city and county of San Francisco. BART is this other regional entity. It was supposed to go around the entire Bay, but in the 50s, San Mateo County dropped out because their tax base or their elected leaders said, they didn't want their taxpayers subsidizing commuters from Santa Clara County to San Francisco. And so they dropped out. And when they dropped out, Marin was like, okay, well, if, they're not going to pay for it, we're not going to pay for it either. And then they dropped out. And then it ended up being this kind of piecemeal system that goes from San Francisco, like from Daly City or now Millbrae SFO, around to the East Bay.
Right.
And that's why it's incomplete. But the other thing to keep in mind, which I think is kind of challenging, is, the mayor's advisor on transportation puts it, this is this woman, Jillian Gillette, she says, BART is a very artisanal public transit system in the sense.
They made it
It's custom.
It's custom. It's insane.
So it costs 5 times more, per mile than a standard gauge rail system. So that's, I like BART. I use BART all the time. But,
They literally made a different wheelbase and a completely unique standard for BART when they could have used the standard width that the New York City subway and London and everybody else shares.
Yeah. And if they had done that, they would have access to all the new rail technologies that are being created in Europe and East Asia. But they didn't do that.
And so now they're constantly building new cars that are bespoke.
Bespoke, right.
It's a bespoke system.
Yeah.
Which is the most insane, incomprehensible concept ever. I want to ask you the toughest question. I've lived in a lot of cities.
Yeah.
I lived in 3 cities that are incredibly diverse. New York City, people get along very well. Everybody's on the R train, the number 4 train, every race, creed, color, ethnicity you could imagine. Los Angeles felt pretty segregated because of the different communities and cars. And when they wanted to put a rail line in, the rail line to Santa Monica just got completed, but there was a lot of pushback for many decades about bringing, as people who I overheard conversations, they were concerned about what element that might bring to Santa Monica from other parts of Los Angeles. And then here in San Francisco, we have places like San Mateo, Palo Alto, Los Altos, and also north of the bridge, that seem to me to be extremely resistant to any kind of apartments, affordable housing. And there seems to be an undertone of race and classism. When we get back from the final break, I want you to tell me how much of transportation and housing in San Francisco is supposedly the most liberal place in the world. How much of that you think is related to race and classism when we get back on This Week in Startups? Hey everybody, let me tell you about an amazing website that I love and use regularly. It's called Capterra. Capterra, Capterra. I always feel like it's a good idea to spell it because you might be listening, you're driving, you're running. You need to know, capterra.com. It is a website where you can find software that your business needs. You ever have this? God, I need a new piece of software. I need some mail server software. I want to get a better price on my mail server. I need a website, or I need CRM, or I need sales software. You always need some software. And you know what? There's so many different applications out there today in so many different categories that wouldn't it be nice if there was a website that could help you sort through it, like Yelp, but for software, for business software? Well, that's Capterra. Thousands of ratings and reviews from actual software users. And it's such an easy to use website. They have 400 categories of software to choose from, over 400. And whether you need help with website building or customer service, project management, maybe you want to track applications or figure out your email marketing, millions of people use Capterra every month. And using Capterra is absolutely free for users. There's no obligation. You don't need to register. It's a free resource that will help you make the right software decisions. And we all know, if you make a wrong decision about your software, what's going to happen? You spend all this time, all this money, and you have everybody trained up, and then you made the wrong decision. You got to rip it out, start over. Everybody's got to get trained again, new user handles, all this kind of nonsense. You want to get it right on the first try. Go to capterra.com/twist, capterra.com/twist, CAPTERRA.com/twist. Find the software that will help you do what you do better. That's all they want to do at Capterra. They want to make you more successful. So go ahead and visit capterra.com/twist. Thanks again to our friends over at Capterra for making a great website and a great directory that's super helpful, and for supporting independent media like This Week in Startups. We truly appreciate it. Hey everybody, welcome back to This Week in Startups. My guest, the amazingly intelligent, passionate, and 25 tweets a day. 20 tweets a day.
Is it too much? It's maybe too much.
No, it's just perfect for me. I love it. I am obsessed with housing. I am obsessed with you and this NIMBY stuff and these meetings and the drama of
You should go to one.
I totally want to go. Tell me which one has the most explosiveness. I want to go. Let's totally do it.
Kind of like, I mean, it really depends.
Got to be the mission one, right? And the mission.
Mission is very interesting. It's very interesting.
I want to go to the mission one. Let's do the mission.
But like Palo Alto is really funny. Palo Alto and Cupertino are super funny.
I totally want to go to this as well, because I've been watching these videos that people do, and they were attacking you at one of these. Like, it got really weird.
I don't tend to go. I prefer to like punch up at people rather than like
you want to fight up.
Yeah, I don't really want to go. Like, I don't want to. This situation, as you asked earlier, I mean, it is really, really enmeshed in race and class in California.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it.
Yeah.
And by the way, just go ahead and follow Kim-Mai Cutler, Kimmai Cutler, Cutler, on the Twitter. And you actually are working at a venture firm now.
Yeah.
You were a journalist, or you just wrote for fun?
I was a journalist.
You were a journalist, and then you went to a venture fund.
Yeah.
As journalists do now. It seems to be the career path.
Or a sign of the
sign of the times. Yeah. Journalism's dying and startups are booming. What's the name of the firm you're at?
Initialized Capital.
Initialized Capital, great. So when we left our hero Kim before the commercial break, I was asking what I think is at the root of much of the NIMBYism. I suspect that the people in Palo Alto or Los Altos or pick the Mill Valley are not interested in people of low income or interested in diversity in their communities. And as one person told me recently who's involved in the housing, I won't say their name, that there is specifically a fear that if you build up these apartments in Palo Alto, you build up these apartments in certain locations, you will have low income people, which is already something that the people who are in these $1 million or $10 million houses don't want. They're very concerned about having their kids mix with their kids. And I thought this is shocking, but it rang true. Is it true that this is a race and a class issue as much as it is about the ability to just build?
Yeah. There's actually a great book on the subject called The Color of Law that was written by, I think, Richard Rothstein of the Economic Policy Institute, and he's actually based in the Bay Area, and it has a lot of Bay Area examples in it. It just came out, and he wrote it at the urging of Ta-Nehisi Coates of The Atlantic, who wrote The Case for Reparations, which is that explosive cover piece on housing, racialized housing policy in America after World War II. I think at the root of it, if we look at housing policy in this country, after the Great Depression, FDR in his New Deal, made housing a cornerstone of wealth creation.
Right.
And, in lieu of having a substantially more diversified social safety net like you see in other industrialized countries, we made housing that, de facto social safety net. And then on top of that, housing is a basket good with education. So when you look at test scores or when you look at schools and you see high test scores like that, the thing that is indicative of is mostly the socioeconomic makeup of the families in that district rather than, say, the talent or the skill of the teachers and the administrators there.
Right. So when people say Palo Alto has a 10 of 10 in terms of the school and it's the best high school in the country, it has to do with the parents and the community.
It has to do with the economic resources and the resources and the social capital and all of that the people who live in that community have.
Right.
And so those two things are tied together. And, there was a whole period for 30 years after the Great, during and after the Great Depression when the FHA or the Federal Housing Administration was created. And, this was the institution that would enable access to capital in certain neighborhoods and not in other neighborhoods. So, they would support home loans in primarily white neighborhoods and then not in, neighborhoods that had a non-white composition.
Right.
And so there were these maps, these redlining maps from the 1930s that you can find of San Francisco and Oakland, and then you can see the blue and green neighborhoods are on one side of the city, and the red neighborhoods are neighborhoods like the Mission or West Oakland or wherever. And so when the government is underwriting capital or supporting capital flows into one type of neighborhood and not the other,
you're definition of race. Yeah,
you're creating this property value differential.
Right.
Between how much real estate costs in one neighborhood and the other. And this also happens to be everyone's store of wealth. So over time, you do create this enormous kind of wealth gap between, this enormous, profound racial wealth gap that, exists and has persisted for many different generations. And so the modern kind of incarnation of that right now is we're not building enough housing to match population growth in the state of California. So, my generation, can't, there's just no way that, we could afford to live in, say, Palo Alto or whatever. They're ending up purchasing real estate, in these neighborhoods that have historically lower property values.
The Mission,
like Mission,
West Oakland.
or Oakland. And you're seeing that happen, and that's creating this gentrification and displacement effect. And you're seeing this at the same time that the federal government since the 1980s has largely stepped out of the picture of supporting affordable housing. And so, the tools that this country has historically used to support lower income families, like vouchers, like rental vouchers, those only cover 1 out of every 4 American families living in poverty today. And so you're having these two things happen at the same time. It's just an enormous crisis.
Which creates this massive amount of chaos, which has in one corner, if I'm strategically understanding this, and really thank you for coming on the program, because I see all this occurring, and I understand that there are many layers I don't understand, and I'm really trying to get educated on it because I know it's a very important issue. You have the gentrification issue occurring in the Mission. That's pitting the incumbent residents versus young people who are professional who can't afford to own a home. Therefore, they are looking for homes that are more affordable. Those are in lower income places. And that creates tension between those two groups.
Yeah.
But then you have people who own homes in San Francisco or own tons of real estate. And correct me if I'm wrong, but those people who are homeowners benefit from scarcity because the value of their homes go up.
Right.
Because there's not a lot of homes, therefore people will pay more for them. And the rents that they can command keep going up, and their cost basis is long been zero because they've paid for the 4-story house they bought with 4 units in it for $100,000 in the 70s, and now they own it free and clear, and they went from rents of $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 to $4,000 to $5,000.
Yeah.
Am I right that those NIMBY people, not in my backyard people, are taking the sides and silently backing and fueling the flames of this anti-gentrification, because anti-gentrification, stopping construction in the Mission, stops new units, therefore maintains the value of their units. Am I explaining my theory correctly, that there are three different forces?
I'm not sure how many people are actively, I'm not sure how many people are actively thinking, oh, this is going to be great for my, there's some people who probably do.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of people who are just like, oh, when I bought into my neighborhood, it was like this, and I loved the way that it was, and I just don't like that none of my friends can stay around, that kind of stuff. So there might be other reasons.
So they want to keep it charming.
Yeah, that might be the case.
Or don't want construction noise.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing that I would stress is the tax system in California really, really enables this sort of behavior. So, in 1978, the voters of this state passed something called Proposition 13, which basically caps your property tax to whatever price you bought it at, and it can increase no more than 2% per year after that. And so in most other states, the property tax system doesn't work like this. So what you're having is not only are, longtime property owners.
Is it this slide here we're pulling up here?
Oh, yeah, we can pull that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here we have California home prices that have grown much faster, obviously, than other places in the United States.
Since the 1970s.
Since the 1970s.
Yeah.
It just bifurcated for some reason.
For a number of reasons.
People moving to California, opportunity.
Right. But I wanted to finish the thought I was just saying, so just really quickly. So in other states, the tax system doesn't work like this. So you gave this example of the person who bought, a multi-unit building in the 70s. Not only are they able to charge rent, whatever the prevailing market rents are, they are also, their taxes are tied to when they bought the place. So they might be paying 1970s or 1980s era taxes.
That makes no sense.
And so
how did that come about?
Because the voters of the state voted for it. And what that does is it totally distorts the land market here, because you've got people who own these parcels of land that they've owned for many decades. And if they sell it or they build on it, it gets reassessed at a higher value. So there's a huge disincentive for them to just do anything with their underused land.
So if I buy my house for $1 million and it appreciates to $5 million, and I pay 1% tax, I'm paying 1% on $1 million, $10,000.
Yeah.
Even though the market rate for that
Plus
is $5 million.
2% per year, however, how many years you've owned it. But that also gets back to the transit issue, because in a lot of other countries, the way that transit is funded is through the increase in land value. So we build, a subway line that makes all of the land and housing around that subway station more valuable because it's transit accessible. And then the state, or the country or whatever is able to capture some of that increment for funding the transit infrastructure, which is how Hong Kong and Japan and Tokyo work. But in California, if we build something and your property values go up, and we build this nice new BART station or whatever, the property values go up, but the property owners are still paying the same taxes, from a generation ago.
The counter argument for them was, well, I bought it, and what if I retire and I don't have the money and it appreciates in value? And I didn't become rich, and my neighbor who got gentrified and became super rich. So there's some sort of counter argument.
Yeah, but
there has to be some reasonableness to it.
Right. You can create incredibly narrow exemptions for people who don't have the cash or income to pay, and then they can pay at sale or something like that. But the more important thing that it also did was it affected commercial real estate. And so you have Disneyland paying property taxes from, half a century ago.
Wow.
Right.
So Disneyland, because they bought it so long ago,
yeah,
their tax basis is from 1950 or something.
Well, probably 1970s or whatever. Something. And then you see all this engineering around, if there's been several kind of notable deals or commercial real estate deals in California where to avoid the change in ownership, they've sold 49% to a different entity that,
Makes total sense.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that happens there.
So if I had the cost basis of $100,000 for a $5 million San Francisco home, if I made an LLC and you were the new buyer and we put the asset in there and you put $5 million in, but we kept the asset as I own 1%, you own 99%, whatever it is, and I take the money out of the LLC, but we co-own the home still.
It's usually office or commercial real estate deals. We didn't know the technicalities of how it works, but it's a very different system, and that's also affected our financing for public education, our financing for infrastructure. It's completely changed municipal finance, and so cities have to find other ways of generating revenue for the services that they offer. So a lot of cities have gone towards these random cornucopia of fees just to make sure that they can pay for basic services.
What is the most contentious, insane community board, housing board review meeting you've been to in the last couple of years? Because I've seen some of them where they were just going off on you or other people.
Well, that one I went to. I mean, I went to because that's where I grew up,
Okay,
and like
which
so
was
I felt like
Cupertino, or?
I grew up down in the South Bay, so I felt like I had a, more of a right, like I don't.
You have a birthright.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like
Three generations, you said.
Yeah, 3 generations in the Bay Area, but I've lived all over the Bay Area. But like, I really empathize and sympathize with, the leadership of the mission and trying to figure out a future for that neighborhood that is able to, work for as many people as possible. So they're going to make the decisions that they're going to make, but like, the place where I'm from, I definitely have the right to go down there.
So what happened? You go down there.
Yeah, I just like
board
pointed
meeting
out
going on about the Apple campus.
No, it was actually just a forum, and it was all the like major, well-known anti-growth elected officials from like the neighboring suburbs down in the South Bay, and a lot of them, have campuses. It was like Palo Alto and Sunnyvale and Cupertino, and I was like, I know this place. This is where I'm from, and I just went down there and tried to point out the hypocrisy of every single person on that panel. And I was like,
Take me through it. Why were they hypocritical?
Well, I mean, like one of them, was talking about gentrification, but then she had killed 60 units of low-income senior housing, and then those ended up being 16 single-family homes. There was another one who said we couldn't build our way to affordability, but the city that he was representing, he was like, we can't, like, look at Manhattan, we can't build our way to affordability, but, his city was more expensive than Manhattan, so I don't understand why that made any sense. Yeah. And there was just like a number of different things that people were saying, and I was like, this just doesn't make any sense. But really, I mean, I think the argument that probably works best, down there is like helping people understand that, if they want their kids or grandkids to live near them, they need to, make capacity for it.
That's it. You go after the grandkids.
Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, it's true because
it's so true.
Well, because I mean, that's how Mountain View changed. Mountain View changed because there was a council member named Lenny Siegel who got elected into power, and he was like, my kids and my grandkids can't stay near me. And then on top of that, like if you look at California, like I think in 13 years we're going to be a fifth over the age of 65, and then we're going to get to about a quarter over the age of 65. Relatively quickly. So we're going to be a heavily, senior population very quickly in the next decade or two. And you're going to need to think of all kinds of solutions. Like if people are aging in these like sprawling suburban areas and they can no longer drive, or like, it's probably one solution is probably really encouraging people to think about multi-generational housing.
What is that multi-generational house? Is this like 2 or 3 generations living in one roof?
Yeah.
Or one plot of land?
Yeah. I mean, like helping people, like whether that's like a child, creating an in-law or an AD unit for
ADU unit.
Yeah, accessory dwelling unit.
Oh, these are like what they call a nanny unit.
Yeah, or granny
in-law.
In-laws.
In-law units.
Yeah, or just, making the case that like the single family home and single family zoning are very iconic for the mid 20th century or 20th century America, but like we're getting to a place where families are less conventional, less orthodox. Like people are waiting longer to have kids, or if they have kids, they might want to have like, their parents live with them.
Sure.
And just helping people think about different family types, and then allowing a greater diversity of housing typologies that support a broader range of family structures.
I thought this slide was pretty interesting. Explain to people who are listening this slide that I just pulled up, because some people are just listening, but I thought this one was particularly important.
Mm-hmm. That's from a legislative analyst's office. So they're like a nonpartisan, legislative research branch.
Okay.
They're awesome. They're really wonky reports. Like if you want to follow them on Twitter, it's LAO_CA on Twitter. And they also like report on all the stuff like they're great. But they were looking at generational differences in housing costs. And they were saying, what would it have cost, a 25-year-old in the 1960s to, rent or own housing versus what it costs a 25-year-old today. And they were finding that today's 25-year-olds, the share of income they spend on housing is, 50%, versus in the 60s, it was, I can't see the slide, but
40% maybe?
Yeah, it was like several percentage points lower.
Looks like
and
about 40.
Yeah. And then on top of that, there was also like in the 60s, I think they did another report after this of like half of 25 to 35-year-olds in the 1960s owned housing in California.
Amazing. Yeah, this is interesting too. I mean, I had, I'll pull up this slide, which I think tells this story, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you used to spend in the United States for a house in San Jose, San Francisco, 3 times your yearly salary.
Yeah, 4 times, 3 to 4 times.
3 to 4 times. So if I made $40,000 a year, my home would be $120 to $160.
In the 70s, maybe.
In the 70s. Now, in the United States, what does it cost?
It's 10 times.
10 times. So if I make $60,000, I got to pay $600.
Well,
if I make $100, I got to pay.
Well, no, this is like for median income. So the median income, in San Francisco is the median household is something like $100K now. Or it's risen substantially. Which is a reflection of the change in population here.
So a house, I think the average home is $1 million.
It's like I think it's like closer to 1.3 now.
1.3.
I don't know. I mean, it might be 1.1. I don't know.
It's somewhere in that 1.x low range. So you're basically 10 times your income. Yeah. And the reason this has happened is because we have not added more units.
Yeah,
this massive acceleration.
It's adding more units. It's income inequality. It's a lack of. And then, it's also, the fact that this country, the orientation of this country is towards treating housing as an investable asset. So there's all these just layers of protections and subsidies at literally every level of government that makes, real estate a great asset. So like there's federal subsidies through the mortgage interest tax deduction, which is $70 billion a year. There's Prop 13, which is the property tax caps. And then there's the zoning, which restricts the amount that you can build and restricts supply. So all of those 3 things make real estate in California this incredible asset, which is why it attracts all these capital flows from the rest of the world.
But how big of an issue is that? Because I know when I moved here, I was living in Pac Heights the first 2 years. We were able to find somebody who was renting their house for 2 years. I tried to buy it from that individual, and they said, I can't sell you my house as much as I would like to, because I'll never find a house like this in San Francisco again. And I was like, okay, fair enough. But we tried to rent a couple of houses, and they said, well, this was a Chinese buyer, and this is a Russian buyer, whatever, and they don't need to rent it. And so they'll take this high price, but they won't negotiate, and the houses would be empty for a year or two. And how many of the homes in Pac Heights and in San Francisco do you think are?
I think that might be a slightly overblown issue.
Overblown? Yeah.
I mean, in San Francisco,
it's big in New York and London.
I would say that the domestic investors also do that as well. Yeah. And like Vancouver just did a study where it looked at domestic versus foreign overseas and found that domestic was, investment. I'm not talking about people actually living in the homes, but when you looked at people using them as investment assets, there was more domestic than there was overseas. But all of that is facilitated by the subsidies and the protections that we have.
Yeah, it makes it even better of an asset, especially if you're trying to get money out of China or Russia or other places. It's a great money store, like you're saying. Why is it that a place like Palo Alto can be so NIMBY and not build apartment units, when they have Facebook and all these places that need them? In other words, all the houses have been bought up in Palo Alto by people who work at Palantir and Facebook
or overseas.
Whatever. And now those companies need housing for their employees, and they also get the benefit of the Caltrains, but they won't build up big apartment buildings in those towns. And I noticed in Redwood City had a bunch of new big buildings with apartments in them. Why is it that Palo Alto and these places are able to just say...
Palo Alto is an incredibly wealthy, affluent suburb. Its median home price is like $2.5 million or something like that. And the orientation of the politics there is a number of elected folks there don't actually like the tech companies. They want the tech companies to leave. Like there was that famous story that went viral last year where the Palo Alto mayor... they were having an argument about whether zoning allowed software programming downtown. And so there was a dispute of whether, I think the Palo Alto mayor made a statement to the effect of software should be out, like software coding should be out, software programming should be out in these industrial parks by Stanford.
Yeah.
And then there was this like huge debate over that. And then like a couple weeks ago, they finally changed. They made it explicit in the planning code that you could write software downtown.
You can?
Yeah.
Good. So if you go to Coupa Cafe or something, you're allowed to write some code while you're having your cappuccino.
Well, you're allowed to have office space that allows,
office space that does it. Yeah.
Does it. But then they didn't go so as far as putting something in the zoning code that allowed people to start startups in their garages. So
interesting.
They were, somebody literally said, like, we don't do that here. I don't know.
Right. Like, except for the extreme examples where people go visit the HP and the Apple garages to go see them specifically because it's so dope and amazing to see them. Hey, to end on a positive note, are there any bright spots in all of this? Is there anything that would make you hopeful? Or do you think that this is a situation that's going to get worse or stay the same, which is pretty horrible given that more people are trying to move here?
Yeah, I was talking to someone who's been very active in politics this morning, who's been in city politics for like 20 years, and he was telling me, this is like this YIMBY movement is the biggest political shift he's seen in the 2 decades he's been here. There are groups all around the Bay Area, in the East Bay, South Bay, San Francisco, and then there's a lot of movement happening at the state level. There were 130 housing bills that were going through the state legislature this session. And some of them are going to make it to Jerry Brown and get signed in to law. So that, the more important lever is probably the state lever, the lever of state power versus like getting 101 cities to all coordinate with each other, So
the state could pass laws that force the Palo Altos or Cupertinos to behave a certain way.
Yeah, to meet their housing targets.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, to meet their housing targets, to hit a certain amount of new units, et cetera.
Yeah.
And what about lawsuits? Like, if you are a concerned citizen, it would seem to me that you would be able to build a group of constituents who says, hey, Palo Alto or whichever place has the Caltrain station that refuses to build, you're not doing your part. We're going to sue you, and you're going to have to pay for the Caltrain's costs or something if you refuse to build more apartments.
There's a group called Carla, which is started by this guy, Brian Hanlon, and they've sued Lafayette, and then, under this old Housing Accountability Act. So if, a city is down zoning or not down zoning, but like if a city is building, less than originally planned or proposed, and there's not some type of real legitimate reason for that, there is basis under that act that you might be able to sue them.
Yeah, wow. It's going to be pretty, as this younger generation grows up, they're activists, they're highly activated and mobile. How big can this YIMBY thing get? Do you think it could get to the point where we could see the election of a YIMBY-driven mayor? If there was like somebody who lived in New York or Los Angeles and had seen like a city run properly and wanted to have as their platform the Manhattanification of San Francisco, in other words, better transportation, better housing, and wanted to grow big, would a mayor like that ever have a chance here?
Well, Mayor Lee wanted to do 30,000 units by 2020, and he's on track to do that. Manhattanization is a very specific word that has a very specific history in the city. It was like a scare word in the 1970s. And so, I think what people should be scared of is a Palo Alto-fication of San Francisco, which is you become this extremely cordoned off, exorbitantly expensive place.
Right.
And I think a lot of longtime San Franciscans actually would be very scared of that too.
Right.
Yeah.
So
the issue isn't like the mayor necessarily being pro housing. The mayor is pro housing. It's a question of how do you get past all these different interest groups, because power is so fragmented in this city, and power is so fragmented in this region, and that's really a structural issue.
Right. But if you get the will of the people, that seems to me to be where you could actually do some damage. If you had the will of the people behind you and people want to see more units, literally the rich people I know in the peninsula are having such a hard time with their kids, being able to live here, grandkids, et cetera. Also, I've heard stories of them, I just can't find any help. They want to have a nanny, they want to have a housekeeper or something.
Most of the jobs here are not high wage jobs, and we don't have a solution for that because there's a massive income gap between
Yep.
the incomes that you're earning at that level and what it costs to rent a
They
a
literally
one bedroom
can't
apartment.
open restaurants anymore. The restaurants are saying we can't find a waiter
Yep.
or a dishwasher or a chef to
Yep.
come work in the restaurant. So we have to shut down because we just can't find people
Yep.
who are willing to be in the Bay Area. And
Yeah.
people are leaving and giving up on the Bay Area.
The other piece of it isn't just the changing the zoning code. It's figuring out a new funding source, which is the state. The amount that the state of California has spent on affordable and low-income housing has declined by 2/3 since the last recession, because the main vehicle that was used to do that were these things called these redevelopment agencies. But they were dissolved out of concern that they were kind of like unaccountable slush funds that were used to take money away from public schools. The baby was kind of thrown out with the bathwater. There were some, less accountable, less transparent elements of these agencies, but they also happened to be the main vehicles through which affordable housing was funded. And so after that went away, the tools that we're left with are ones that are largely at the municipal level, like the inclusionary housing, which is a percentage of every new development that goes towards that's below market rate, or issuing bonds. And so, I think if you want to get to a place, where we do have a more coherent solution, you have to do both of those things at the same time, which is get people to understand that we need, an enormous pool of funding for low-income housing, and also, making it easier to build.
Let me run an idea by you.
Yeah.
And then we'll wrap up. If mayorjason.com, I have a domain name. Mm-hmm. If Mayor Jason had an idea, you tell me how you think this would be perceived. Mm-hmm. We auction off, people can put in a bid to increase the number of floors in their existing building or development. Mm-hmm. And we say, we're going to set a goal of raising, I don't know what it costs to build the next BART station, but let's say 3 BART stations out to Sunset. Mm-hmm. And we say, hey, we're going to build 3 more BART stations that way, and we'll go from Millbrae down to San Mateo. Mm-hmm. Get another station there, and maybe go 1 more to Redwood City. I don't know, 5 more stations. We say we're going to hold an auction. It's a one-time auction. It's an auction of the century. Mm-hmm. You get to bid on adding X number of square footage to your building. Mm-hmm. You have the right to do that in perpetuity, mm-hmm. but you have to pay whatever it is you bid for that right, and you will be on the fast track to build those extra floors. So mm-hmm. if you were building a 6-story, you could build a 10, or if you were building a 10, you could build a 14, whatever it is. But you have to put in your bid of what that square footage is worth to you, and then you pay that over some period of time for taxes. That is the bond, or the collateral on the bond, or somehow related to the bond, to build those new stations. Mm-hmm. So we say to the people, the good people of the Bay Area and all the different regions, we're going to have some taller buildings. Those people are going to pay for that right, and that right is going to solve the transportation issue because we'll have funded 5 more stations on the BART. Mm-hmm. What do you think of this idea? The structure maybe doesn't work in that exact specific way that you're talking about, but conceptually, at a broad level, that's what people trading
are getting to.
Oh, really?
Which is we used again when I gave the example of the redevelopment agencies, there used to be tax increment financing, where you would take an increment of the future increase in assumed increase in property values from building a transit station nearby, and then you would capture that to then fund the transit station. And then, that was destabilized when redevelopment was ended, and then the new version of that needs to be, a new, more transparent and accountable version of that needs to be formed.
I'm bifurcating the 2 issues, though.
Yeah.
We're going to build 5 new stations that'll just extend the system, but you'll be able to buy the right to any of the areas in the Bay Area because we know all transit helps all and all units help all. Therefore, there is an input bid. We're going to have a certain amount of extra development. We've all agreed we're going to add 50,000 units in the next 20 years. So we're going to have a 50,000 unit auction, and that 50,000 unit auction is going to create the 10 more stations. Yeah. And
so I think I may not be getting the specifics right, but so again, this goes back to this challenge of Prop 13, which is what you're arguing about kind of already effectively happens in a certain way. Like if a transit station goes up, the cities and the state's policies generally favor something called transit-oriented development, which is you build more densely near transit stations. But the developer, if a new transit station goes in, developers already bid on the parcels around the station, and they compete over that in the private market, and then the landowner is the one who sells that
I'm saying
capacity to them.
In Soma who wants to build an extra 5 stories, or next to the Twitter building wants to build an extra 10 stories, they pay there, but the station shows up in Millbrae, right? So you separate the two.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Because we know that those people can get $2,000 square foot rents. So those units are super valuable. So they're willing to bid high prices to get those new luxury units in by the Warriors Arena or by the Salesforce Tower or by the Embarcadero, whatever it is. Great views.
Well,
and then we use that to get the BART system to Sunset, get the BART system to the, to Burlingame and onto San Mateo and onto Redwood City. Anyway, it's just an idea.
Yeah, I mean, conceptually, that's the right way to like at a broad level, that is the right way to go.
Yeah.
But
Auctions.
I mean, like, but when we issue a bond or a transportation bond, like that is effectively paid for, through taxes, and those are collected all over the region to then fund like the BART expansion or BART maintenance.
Yeah, what I'm saying is the developers pay. They get those rich developers, and then the taxpayers of the state can say, you know what? Instead of me having to pay for it, I like the idea of that developer who's going to sell those 20 units. I want them to pay for the BART station.
Well,
it would
this
just
is
change
part of the other.
it would change the narrative.
I understand that, but like this is part of the issue. This is a larger issue, which is like real estate developers only build like 2,000 units of housing a year here. Like, or an average, they've averaged around 2,000 for the last 20 years. So people assume that there's a lot more, there is wealth and there is land value to certainly be captured there. But is it enough to actually address the scale of this crisis? It's not, because every year the residential real estate values of the city, go up by like $100 billion a year, which is all the existing real estate. And then all of that's appreciating wildly. And then developers only building like 2,000 units a year. So like, how much can you capture out of that? Like you can capture hundreds of maybe, below market rate units. But, part of the reason that we're in the issue that we're in is because the discourse assumes that, new development through impact fees and then below market rate requirements can like suddenly magically pay for all of our expanded infrastructure needs, which is just not really the case.
Possible.
Yeah.
All right. So it's a complete disaster. It's multifaceted. It's intractable. And the suffering will continue in the dysfunctional Bay Area. Thank you for tuning in to This Week in Depressing Bay Area News. It really is super depressing. It's so goddamn depressing. It's like, literally, I have friends who are giving up on San Francisco, like just giving up. People are giving up. People do not like living here. It's incredible. We are going to have you on again, and we're going to keep discussing this very important issue. Please follow Kim-Mai Cutler, Kim-Mai Cutler, and she is with Initialized Capital. And you probably know the managing partner is Alexis Ohanian.
And Gary Tan.
And Gary.
Yeah.
I knew Gary from Posterous days. I loved Posterous. And of course, Alexis is from Reddit. And that's a pretty cool group you're with. Are you actually investing in startups? Are you meeting with startups?
Doing a little bit of everything.
A little bit of everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Super cool. And if people want to read stuff, do you have a place where you prefer to write stuff? I know you do TechCrunch once in a while.
I've done some TechCrunch stuff.
Do you have your own blog?
I run a Medium thing.
You can
find me on Medium too. Yeah.
Follow her on Medium. All right. Thanks so much to Emmy Award-winning producer Jackie for setting up the show, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.